I mentioned before that I worked at GameStop, and I guess I need to go into a little more detail about that since there's a lot of stuff out there about GameStop and how horrible a place at work it was, just the horrible practices. I didn't think it was that bad. Like, horrible practices aside, when I worked there, it was during probably the best times of that company. Because at the time, you didn't really have like the pushy sales tactics or anything like that. So I've got kind of good memories about it. But anyway, from when I was like 16 to for years, I wanted to work at GameStop. And they opened one up in my city, and I'd go by there trading games, buy games, but you had to be 17 to work there. I actually almost got turned away because I was 16 trading in games, and they're like, oh, you're not old enough. You're not going to be able to trade them in again, because no one ever asked for my age before. So that was actually pretty funny. But from age 16 to age 20, I would go by there and be like, hey, are y'all hiring? Be like, well, man, we're taking applications. You're welcome to apply. And I'd go by and talk to the manager every so often. And this is not a good way to go about it. Do not be this person. I was that person. It is not a way to get a job. If you harass them, annoy them, because from what I understood later, every time I turned in an application, he would rip it up and throw it away. He's just like, I'm tired of dealing with this bullshit. And I don't blame him. Because I won't say really annoying, but just kind of annoying. And there were a lot of people applying because a lot of people wanted to work there. But I'll say it again, do not work in your hobbies. Just because you like something doesn't mean you should work in it. And I kept pressing, I kept pushing through the years. And then one day, I was out eating and I saw the manager. And he's like, come on by, man, I'll give you a job. He finally relented. And he hired me on. And that's when I learned why you didn't want to work at GameStop back then. Because it wasn't that bad of a place to work, but it's not a good place to work if you want to make any money. And at the time, I was in college and I needed extra money. But the way the scheduling worked, I think the store itself had 80 hours. Maybe even less than that. Well, the store manager got 45. And that left, or it may have been 80 hours to split between the second key, the third key, and then 3 part-time associates. So that'll tell you how many hours part-time game advisors got. Because the second key needed a solid 35 hours, and then the third key needed 35, 40 hours. So you're looking at maybe one shift a week of 4 hours at the most. And that was if you were lucky. Because I was the least senior game advisor, so I was getting barely any hours. And I was just like, oh. Because it was so bad. Because I worked so infrequently, like I said before, I wasn't able to learn anything. Because when you work a retail job, like if you work as a cashier or you do something, it's all about repetition. If you're doing it every day, it becomes second nature. Like Walmart, one cashier shift, and I won't say you'll have it mastered, but you'll know what to do, and you won't need much help. Me, I always needed help, and the manager I always worked with is actually pretty funny, because I actually worked with, he's got a YouTube channel of his own now, Camelot 331. He's pretty popular. I actually worked with him. And he hated working with me because he complains like, man, you don't know how to do anything. I hate working with you because I have to hold your hand on everything. And I didn't blame him for being mad because I wouldn't have been happy about it either. And the second key, this is funny, I never worked with him because I always worked basically closing shifts because that's when they needed somebody, you needed 2 people to close. Because he only worked day shifts because at night he was way too busy doing raids on World of Warcraft and he couldn't miss it because I guess that's how he made a living. Because that guy had worked at GameStop for years. Like that guy had been there when I was a kid when it was Babbage's Software, etc. in the mall. So that guy worked there forever. And he was second key, and he hung out. And then there was another part-time guy who I'd worked with before at the bookstore, and another guy who, at the time, he's since gotten his shit together. He was the laziest person I've ever seen. He would have to be at work at 2, and he would oversleep. And I don't mean like he woke up early to go to class or, work another job or work third shift and needed a nap. No, he would oversleep. He'd sleep past 2. And he'd miss work, and they just like, well, he loses hours. And it made me kind of mad, because if he overslept, that was an hour and a half I could have got. Because at the time, I really needed the money. But that was the unfortunate part of it. There just wasn't enough hours to go around. And I'm pretty sure that's how it is now. There's not enough. Unless you move up, you really have to love being around video games and working in retail. And then there's another guy that they kept him on the schedule, but he'd since gotten another better job with actual hours so he could feed his kids. But they kept him on the schedule so he could keep renting games, because that was the biggest benefit. Like, even if you only got 4 hours a week, you could come by whenever you wanted and rent a game for 2 or 3 days. Brand new. Whatever you wanted, because they were fine with it. And he kept several games out, and finally, I've talked about this before, an audit came up or something, and he had to bring back Marvel vs. Capcom 2 on the Xbox. And this was 2009. But even back then, that game was very valuable. Like, it was used, and it was $80. But the guy had to bring it back. They told him, just bring it back. We'll do the audit, and you'll be fine. You'll come back in and rent it. Because they really weren't supposed to keep him on the schedule, because he was really kind of cheating the system. But the district manager, I guess, didn't care. But he brought it in, put it on the counter. As soon as he left, a guy came in and bought it. And that poor guy was so mad. He got mad at the manager, and I think the manager finally took him off the schedule. He was like, I don't have to take this shit from you. And the manager, he was alright. He was just kind of full of shit. He was just like that guy I know named Joe. He was forever telling lies and telling stories. All he talked about was how big his dick was, how many women he had in waiting in case things didn't work out with his wife. Because the guy had 3 kids. And the best I could tell, he was a good father, I guess. But they always boasting about stuff, how great he was, an athlete. And you can't really, if it's somebody you don't know, you can't really call them on their shit. And I didn't really care, and I just let him talk. And also, the dude could eat. Daggum, that guy could eat. Like, we'd go to, he'd send me like Sonic or McDonald's, and he'd get 2 or 3, sometimes 3 or 4 combo meals with their respective Cokes, and he'd eat all that. Like, he could eat $20 worth of Taco Bell like it was no big deal. And it was reflected in his size, because the guy was built like a refrigerator. Big, heavy guy, probably 400, 450, just huge. He looked like he'd eaten a refrigerator and he was still trying to digest it. But the lack of hours got to me, but I wanted to stick with it because I was going back to college in another city. So I got in touch with the manager in that city, and this store actually had hours. Like, yeah, man, we're busy. I'm going to give you like 25, 30 hours a week. Just let me know your class schedule. Well, I'm glad to work around it. Just you'll probably be working every weekend. I was like, oh, whatever, man. That's part of it. And I had it lined up, and I go by when the day it was supposed to be my first shift, and I was like, hey, I'm starting today. Your manager hired me. Well, man, I tell you this, that guy got fired, and we don't know anything about you getting hired. So that kind of put my end to the GameStop career. But I really, other than the lack of hours, it really wasn't that bad. It was easy retail. Although at first I got put to work alphabetizing game racks, but that was just part of it. It was relatively easy retail. They wanted you to get reserves, but they couldn't exactly give me less hours than I was already getting for not getting reserves. But that's one thing they really needed to think about and consider, was maybe give somebody an incentive for the reserves. Hey, you get $1 for every reserve. Or hey, for every Game Informer subscription, you get this. Instead, it was, you need to get this, and if you do, congratulations, you got it. But I don't know. Things were better then. There were better times. But I can't speak to how GameStop has been since. I've only heard nothing but bad things, but I can safely say it wasn't the worst job I ever had. It just had the worst hours.